After exploring the stories of Elsa and Cruella, it's tempting to walk away with a dangerously tidy conclusion. Engaging with the shadow is a guaranteed path to liberation. Just stop suppressing yourself, embrace your inner power, and life will start falling into place. But that's barely scratching the surface. The problem is that the shadow itself is amoral. It is neither good nor bad. It is raw, primal energy, entirely unregulated by conscious thought. The real question is never whether you've gained access to it, but who, in that relationship, gets to set the terms. Acknowledging your shadow isn't the end of personal transformation. It's the beginning of something far more demanding. At some point, everyone runs up against the same wall. This force starts asking too much of you, your time, your resources, your wholesale abandonment of everything else that matters. And this is where the road forks. In one direction, that energy folds into your personality and starts working for you. In the other, your personality starts bending around the energy, and you slowly lose your footing and yourself. As a counterpoint, How to Train Your Dragon offers a fundamentally different model. Not suppression, not blind submission, but the slow and deliberate process of building a relationship with something that initially looks like a mortal threat. This isn't a conversation about whether to accept the shadow, it's about what comes after. Because gaining access to power is not the same thing as learning to live with it. In Whiplash, we encounter one of the starkest possible scenarios of shadow dynamics. Not suppression, not integration, but total surrender. Andrew doesn't flee his dark side the way Mark does, and he doesn't merge with it in some chaotic burst of release like the narrator in Fight Club. He takes a different, more unsettling path. He lets the shadow set the rules and then follows them without question. His hunger for greatness isn't simply creative ambition, it's an entry point for the shadow. What drives him isn't a genuine love of music so much as a paralyzing terror of becoming nobody. And it's precisely into this void that Fletcher appears. Crucially, Fletcher isn't just an external antagonist. He is a living projection of the part of Andrew's psyche that had already taken shape inside him. Fletcher doesn't introduce anything new. He simply gives voice to the beliefs Andrew already holds. You're not good enough, you have no right to weakness, your worth equals your output. What was once internal pressure acquires an external face and becomes a system. Then comes the pivotal shift. Andrew stops resisting this pressure and starts collaborating with it. He buys into the logic. Suffering is the price of greatness. From this point on, his development ceases to be development in any real sense. It's not growth, it's contraction. He sacrifices his relationships, his rest, his basic self-preservation. But even that isn't the core of it. What matters most is that he surrenders his own subjectivity. He stops asking why, he just follows. It's important not to confuse this with sublimation. In the classical sense, sublimation means transforming an impulse into a constructive form without dismantling the personality in the process. What happens to Andrew is something else entirely. This isn't the rerouting of energy, it's the hostile takeover of all psychic energy by a single objective. Every bit of his inner life gets conscripted into the pursuit of achievement, and it stops serving his life as a whole. That's why his shadow never becomes a resource. It becomes an overseer. It doesn't grant him freedom, doesn't expand him, doesn't add any depth. It only demands, controls, and punishes. The scene with his hands bleeding at the drum kit isn't just a visual gut punch. It's a precise metaphor for a system that requires a person to destroy themselves in order to earn the right to exist. The film's ending remains deliberately ambiguous. On one hand, Andrew reaches a technical peak. On the other, he fully syncs with Fletcher. He has absorbed Fletcher's entire framework as his own. This is not a victory over the shadow. It is consent to live by its rules. Where Fight Club's shadow seizes control through destruction, here it does so through discipline and the ideology of perfection. And that form is far more dangerous, because from the outside, it looks like success. If Whiplash gives us the shadow as tyrant, then How to Train Your Dragon is one of the most precise and humane depictions of integration ever put to screen. But to understand why this path becomes possible at all, we need to start not with the dragon, but with Hiccup himself. From the outset, he's in acute conflict with the world he inhabits. In Viking culture, a person's worth is measured in strength, aggression, and the capacity to destroy the enemy. His father, the chief, is the embodiment of this system. He isn't just a parent, he's the carrier of a collective persona, a rigid set of rules about what a man, a son, and a warrior is supposed to be. Hiccup fails to match this image at every turn. He's weaker, more cautious, more inclined toward analysis than blind rage. Nobody listens to him, he's a laughingstock, and to his father, Hiccup's otherness registers as something close to a personal failure. What's worth noting here is that there's no outright cruelty or wholesale rejection in the father-son dynamic. What exists is something more subtle and more wounding, a failure to be seen. Hiccup simply isn't recognized for who he actually is. It's from this place of invisibility that he first tries to fit into the system. He wants to kill a dragon not out of any innate hatred, but out of a desperate need to prove, I'm one of you too. I can be what you need. But the moment he encounters the night fury, something fundamental shifts. For the first time, Hiccup comes face to face not with a mythologized enemy, but with a real, living creature. And instead of the expected aggression, he sees fear. He sees in Toothless not a monster, but a reflection of himself, another misfit, physically damaged, outside every accepted norm. In the language of depth psychology, this is the true moment of shadow recognition. In that instant, Hiccup does something that shatters the entire logic of his people. He drops the knife. This is the point of no return. He isn't just refusing to kill, he's rejecting the entire framework within which that act made sense. He chooses understanding over compliance with the expectations of others. What follows is often flattened into a simple taming, but what actually unfolds is a far richer and more intricate dynamic, the building of a relationship with one's own power. The integration process moves through several distinct stages. It begins with replacing fear with curiosity. Rather than subduing the dragon by force, Hiccup starts studying him, tracking patterns, reactions, vulnerabilities. Psychologically, this mirrors the moment a person trains themselves to observe their own forbidden impulses rather than reflexively suppressing or condemning them. This dynamic deepens into a state of mutual vulnerability. Toothless cannot fly without Hiccup's help because of his damaged tail, while Hiccup cannot realize his own potential within the old Viking framework. This interdependence is a near-perfect illustration of the Jungian idea that the ego without the shadow is limited and directionless, while the shadow without the ego remains disoriented and potentially destructive. The culmination is negotiated trust. The prosthetic tail fin is a foundational act. Hiccup doesn't try to suppress the dragon's power, he gives it shape. He introduces an element of control through conscious collaboration rather than domination. And in doing so, the shadow gains direction while the ego gains access to an enormous reserve of energy. It's in this bond that genuine contact is born, the very contact that was so absent in Hiccup's relationship with his father. Unlike the human world, where Hiccup's traits marked him as deficient, within the partnership with Toothless those same qualities, his observational precision, his caution, his empathy, stop being liabilities and become the foundation of a singular kind of strength. This transformation doesn't just change Hiccup, it rewrites the rules for everyone around him. Where Andrew in Whiplash effectively becomes a slave to his inner tyrant, Hiccup builds a genuine partnership, one that doesn't reduce his personality to a single function, but expands it, giving him the power to redefine the terms of the game for his entire society. The final image of the two of them is not a story of healing in any conventional sense. Both remain marked, one missing part of a leg, the other part of a tail. But it is precisely in this acknowledged incompleteness that true wholeness is born. The core insight is this: real strength doesn't come from being whole and unbroken. It comes from building a durable relationship with what once felt like a threat. This is the highest form of engagement with the shadow, not suppression, not submission, but conscious and generative collaboration. If you step back and take in everything this series has examined, one thing becomes clear. The problem was never the shadow itself. The energy it holds is completely neutral in nature. In Whiplash, that energy becomes relentless pressure, and a person ends up living by the rules of their inner taskmaster, slowly hollowing out. In How to Train Your Dragon, the same force becomes a formidable ally, but only because the hero chooses to build a relationship with it. The difference lies not in the scale of the power, but in your stance. You either submit to this energy, or you learn to work with it. But here a harder, more uncomfortable question surfaces. What if the real problem operates on an entirely different level? What if a person can go through their entire life without ever confronting the shadow directly, and still end up at the same place of absolute emptiness? There is one more scenario, the most socially sanctioned, and therefore the most invisible. It's a life in which you do everything right. Build a career, start a family, tick every box others hold up for you. And then one day, you realize that nothing is happening inside you at all. No conflict, no drive, no meaning, just an existence in which you did everything properly, but never figured out who you were actually doing it for. This is no longer a story about the shadow as an active force. It's a story about a person who never met themselves, who chose the comfortable social mask over the living reality underneath. In the next essay, we'll look at this condition through the lens of American Beauty. We'll see what happens when the shadow isn't suppressed or integrated, just quietly ignored for years on end. That path leads to the most silent, and at the same time the most devastating, crisis of self.